In a world where hustle culture collides with wellness warnings and workplace demands keep evolving, how do we stay sharp without burning out? How do we navigate the endless stream of wellness trends while actually getting results? This is the Work and Wellness Podcast, and I'm your host, Ange Davis. Drawing from my own journey of wins, stumbles, and honest revelations, I'll be bringing you raw, unfiltered conversations with experts and inspiring guests who've been there, lived it, and found a better way. Together, we'll cut through the noise and workshop what it really means to be well in today's workplace. No more choosing between success and sanity. No more sacrificing health for achievement. Whether you're struggling with burnout, searching for purpose, or simply ready to work smarter, not harder, you're in the right place. This is real talk about real solutions for real people. Let's get into it. Hello friends, welcome to the show. I am thrilled to welcome Elise Catchlove to the show today. Elise is a meditation teacher, wellness mentor, and advocate for expansive living, which is a concept I absolutely love. After spending over a decade navigating anxiety and feeling confined by a small life, Elise discovered the life-changing practice of Vedic meditation, which not only helped her manage anxiety, but completely transformed her path. And Elise actually took me through my Vedic meditation course. Now Elise dedicates her work to helping others cultivate calm, clarity, and connection in their personal and professional lives. With a really rich and non-linear career spanning acting, fashion design, and wellness, Elise brings a really unique depth to her teachings, understanding the pressures of modern work, the weight of stress, and the struggles of maintaining mental well-being in high-performance environments, which is right up my alley, and I know all of you listeners as well. Whether through meditation training, anxiety management workshops, or business wellness programs, Elise empowers individuals and teams to integrate mindfulness into daily life, improving focus, resilience, and overall well-being. Today, we're going to explore the role of meditation in the workplace, how it improves our performance, how mindfulness can improve decision-making and leadership, and simple ways to create a more expansive and balanced life. Welcome, Elise.
Thank you. What an intro.
Well, it is all you, my friend.
Oh, so lovely. Lovely to be here.
So good to have you here. I love doing the intro with people on the call so that they get a little bit of a hype and a pump up before the interview, right?
Can I come on here every day?
I'll be your little mantra as the day starts.
I won't need meditation anymore. You'll just give your self-esteem I need.
Oh, so good. Thank you so much for coming. You obviously took me through my Vedic meditation course, which was absolutely phenomenal. But your journey to meditation was deeply personal. Can you share what led you to Vedic meditation and how it changed your life? And even maybe just for our listeners, if they don't know what differentiates Vedic meditation from others, sort of a little bit about Vedic.
Sure. Okay. So I came to meditation because of anxiety. And I'd pretty well experienced anxiety, to be honest, my entire life, up until my late 20s when I actually learned to meditate. I was a very anxious child. At the time, of course, I didn't know what that was. I mean, when I was growing up, anxiety wasn't really spoken about, and it certainly wasn't spoken about with children. And so I just thought I was a nervous child. I was very nervous. I worried a lot. There was a lot of overthinking happening in this little body. And I now know that that was anxiety. And that anxiety ended up following me sort of into my teens. So, when I was young, now I know why I was anxious, but of course at the time I didn't. And now I know it's because I'm a very highly sensitive person. And I know a lot of other very highly sensitive people were quite often called empaths. And so as a child, I was very sensitive to my environment and very sensitive to the energy of the people around me. And so when someone was stressed and anxious around me, I was like a sponge. I would just suck that in as a child, and I would feel that anxiety and that stress. I would internalize that, which is really quite strange for a child. But I think a lot of people are able to relate to that, being very sensitive in the world. And now I know how to navigate that. I've got a lot of tools in my toolkit to be able to navigate that, to be able to protect my energy. And actually now it's my superpower. It's what sort of makes me a good teacher, I guess, is because I can really sort of feel into other people's energy and sit with them and relate to them and connect with them. And it's really lovely. But for a really long time, it was very challenging to navigate. And so, as I said, that anxiety then followed me into my teen years. And a few things further fueled the anxiety for me. So I suffered from very severe cystic acne when I was in high school. And it was, to be honest, soul-destroying. It was a very difficult period of my life. It really destroyed my self-esteem. It destroyed my self-confidence. I remember being a teenager, this is around kind of 14, 15, 16. And of course, you start being interested in boys. And my best friend at the time was gorgeous. And all the guys, wanted to date her. And I felt completely invisible. And it was a lonely time. And looking back, I was definitely depressed for a couple of years. But my anxiety was being fueled by that experience. Another thing to sort of layer into it, I am by nature a type A perfectionist. It's something I've worked on tremendously in the past decade since I learned to meditate. But as a teen, that perfectionism was sort of wreaking a lot of havoc. So I placed a lot of pressure on myself to be perfect. If it wasn't perfect, it wasn't good enough. And that pressure in anybody leads to a lot of anxiety, and it certainly did for me. And so then the anxiety followed me into my young adult life, and that's where it started to become a little bit more problematic. I started my career out as an actor, and then I moved into fashion. I studied fashion design and marketing, and I had my own clothing brand at the time. And I was what you would call very high functioning. So I was a very high functioning, anxious person. A lot of my clients can relate to that. And so nobody would have ever known I was anxious. I was able to hold it together really well. I was able to mask it really well. I was able to achieve and go out and get stuff done. But my really, really unhealthy coping mechanism was avoidance. So anything that would trigger fear for me would fire off my anxiety. And of course, I didn't like the way the anxiety made me feel. And so I would avoid. So I turned down a lot of opportunities in my life, both personally and professionally. I played really small, and my life sort of felt small. It started to become smaller and smaller. And really, it was just a protective mechanism. And it worked, really well in the sense that I was able to temper the anxiety, but yet I wasn't playing big in my life and I wasn't taking on opportunities. And, I talk a lot about neural pathways in the brain. And, if you repeat something over and over and over and over again, you create a new belief system or you create a new habit. And so when you have this habit of avoidance to soothe yourself, it's essentially a self-soothing tool, then, and you do it over and over and over again, it starts to become a way of being. Yeah. And that's what it became for me. So my life felt really small. And honestly, I don't really recall a moment where, I decided that's it. There wasn't a particular thing that led me to anxiety, but rather it was kind of a lifetime of dealing with anxiety and realizing that it was very unhealthy and it was keeping me small and I needed to do something about it. I'd felt jack of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
So that's when I started to look into meditation. And, every psychologist that ever existed always recommends meditation as the sort of first line for treating anxiety and managing anxiety. But I always thought, well, please, there's no way I'm going to be able to meditate. Like, my mind's crazy. I've got a monkey mind. I just think the whole time, how am I going to quieten the mind? This is one of the biggest myths of meditation. And So I started researching meditation practices, and that's when I stumbled upon Vedic. And it seemed to be the antithesis of that. You know, thoughts are part of meditation. We don't need to clear the mind of thoughts. And I was like, interesting. I think this might be the practice for me. And so I signed up. I actually signed up with my husband. He came for stress. I came for anxiety. And, you know, it's cliche, but here we are.
The rest is history.
The rest is history. It really changed my life. I mean, it really, really did. And not only did it significantly reduce the anxiety, but it also completely changed the trajectory of my career. So I closed down my clothing brand and I completely pivoted into wellness and have never looked back, really. It's the one of the biggest joys in my life is teaching meditation and expansive living tools and so forth. But to answer your second question, what is Vedic meditation? So Vedic meditation is a mantra-based practice, okay? So we're giving this little sound, and that sound has a particular resonance that's very charming to the mind. And when we use it correctly, it's able to guide the mind very easily away from active thinking and down into these deeper and subtler states of awareness and eventually down into what we call transcendence, which simply means to go beyond. So we're moving beyond active thinking into the quiet part of the mind. But there are thoughts popping in and it's totally fine. And it's one of the most freeing parts of the technique.
Yeah.
So that's a little snapshot.
I love that. And I think so many people will resonate with you, Elise, about being high functioning anxiety. I certainly do. I think no one would ever really know that I would have had anxiety. People would have just thought I was a high performer. And it's usually great for your employer, for the people around you, because you would just go, go, go.
You're good at getting stuff done.
You're good at getting stuff done, but it's not good for you internally. And I think the more that we avoid, like I could have been talking to myself when you were sharing your story, and thank you for sharing that. But I think the more that we avoid, the more it just starts chipping away, and it makes it really difficult to keep going. It's got an expiry date on it, I say, you know?
It does. And I think it does for everybody. And everybody sort of gets to that point at a different stage in their life. Some people it's sooner, some people it's later. But we all get to that point. I think, you know, quite often we can look at really sort of highly stressed people and go, but look at them, they're achieving all this stuff and they're getting stuff done and, you know, look at how successful they are. But eventually it's going to catch up with them. Yeah. And I think eventually it catches up with everybody in one way or another. And for everyone, it's different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there'll be a lot of people in the workforce and professionals who experience very similar to the story that you shared, Elise. And I'm sure that many of those people are people who come and see you for meditation. They might be experiencing high levels of stress. Like you said, you went with Pete and he was, going for stress. They might be on the verge of burnout. How can meditation help improve that for people? So you sort of said you sought out meditation and it changed your life. But if I'm a professional who's experiencing stress and burnout, what can meditation do for me, for my stress, my burnout and managing that, and then ultimately for my performance?
Yeah. Okay, so burnout is a real thing. It's very prevalent. I have many, many clients that come to me because of burnout and severe overwhelm and fatigue and all of those kinds of things. The reason why, just to give you a bit of sort of understanding around burnout, the reason why we're experiencing, or so many of us are experiencing burnout, is because of the amount of stimulus we're being exposed to on a daily basis. And when I say stimulus, it's coming from a lot of different angles. So we're getting hit with a lot of blue light, and blue light is artificial light, and it's affecting our circadian rhythm, which is then affecting our ability to get good quality sleep. We're getting hit with a lot of blue light, throughout the day, and particularly late into the night. And that's where it becomes really problematic. We're also getting hit with a lot of mental imagery. So from our phones, scrolling Instagram and TikTok, you think about the amount of times you scroll, you're getting hit with a new image almost every second. That's a lot of mental imagery for your brain to take in. Then we're going to work. a lot of your audience will relate to this one. And cognitively, we are taking in so much information. Okay. And then there's the doing part. Okay. And so that can be different for everybody, but that's all the stuff that you're doing in and around the workplace, but also in your personal life, in your family life, getting kids ready for school, lunch boxes, after school activities, social tennis, the gym, running to and from meetings. There's a lot of doing that's happening.
I feel exhausted even listening to that.
I know, right? You and me both. And for most people, when they first wake up in the morning, the first thing they do is check their phone. Yeah. And so we're getting hit with blue light and stimulus before our feet have even touched the floor in the morning. That's a lot for the body to take in. That's a lot for the mind to take in. And I always say to my students that the body and the mind are intrinsically linked. Okay, so whatever's happening in body is happening in mind and vice versa. And so you will know when you have a big work day and you're pumping big deadlines and you're jumping from meeting to meeting, cognitively you're fried, but your body is also fried too. You feel physically exhausted, which is why at the end of the day, all you want to do is veg out on the couch and watch Netflix. Yeah. Okay, no judgment. I watch Netflix too. But that is why, okay, because the body and mind is just so fried. Okay, so where does meditation come into to save the day, so to speak? So I always describe meditation, I give a little analogy. If you were to imagine that the mind is an ocean, okay? And so on the top here, we have that busy part of the mind. This is where we've got, our flippers on and our goggles on and we're kicking about in frenetic thinking and busyness. This is basically the conscious mind where all of your thinking happens, rumination, thinking, feeling and perceiving, so on and so forth. This is that choppy part of the ocean. And in fact, if we were to go out and swim in the ocean now, most of us would spend the majority of the time with our head above the water. Yeah, we'd duck down under a wave, but most of the time we'd be up with that choppy layer. This is the layer of our mind that we're most familiar with. And for most people, it's actually the only part of the mind that they're familiar with. But there is a part in the mind that exists in every single human being, no one is exempt, that is completely still and quiet. Okay? So when we meditate, what's happening, and particularly with a technique like Vedic, is we are moving ever so gently and ever so effortlessly beyond the surface level of the ocean and down into the deeper depths of the ocean. So down into these deeper and subtler states of awareness and eventually down into this thoughtless state. And as I said, thoughts will be popping in throughout the meditation, but you will touch base, might be for a second, might be for a few minutes, might be for 10 minutes, with this space where there is no thinking, feeling or perceiving, just being. Now, this part of the mind is very healing, okay? And one thing it heals itself of is accumulated stress, okay? So it's, with Vedic, what we're aiming to do is actually move accumulated stress, tension and fatigue out of the body while simultaneously cleaning up the surface level of the mind. And so what happens is when we do this every day, we start to clean up the nervous system and we start to have more clarity. And one of the biggest sort of benefits that come with meditation is you start to become more resilient to stress. So I always say when you become a meditator, you don't stop experiencing stress.
Yeah.
Okay. Stress is part of modern life. We all experience stress. We will all continue to experience stress all throughout the day. What we want to do is to be able to become more resilient to the stress. So be able to become more calm so that when we go to work, we have deadlines land in our lap and we have this massive to-do list and we can start to just tick things off and slowly work our way through rather than getting totally overwhelmed and then not being able to focus. Our productivity goes down. So ultimately what we're doing is trying to build our resilience to stress. And of course, when we meditate, we are activating our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest. And we want to be doing that as much as possible. Ultimately, what we're aiming for is a regulated nervous system so that we can handle whatever the day has to throw at us.
Yeah, I think it's such a great explanation, Elise, because I know that I was worried, and this sounds like such an irrational worry when I say it out loud, but I was worried I was going to lose my edge. Like I was going to become too calm or like not have that edge to perform if I were meditating. But what I found is it actually allowed me to respond rather than react to situations. So rather than going down this whole chaotic funnel of trying to solve this drama or problem at work, I was actually able to pause for a moment and respond rather than react. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that meditation taught me, for sure.
The perfect way to describe it.
Yeah.
I couldn't have said it better myself. That's exactly what it does. And, you know, I've heard that before many times. I don't want to lose my edge, that stress makes me get stuff done. I don't know if I can swear on this podcast, so I'll try not to say that word. Get shit done.
Yeah.
I'm a meditation teacher who swears, believe it or not, all the time. I have a very potty mouth. But yeah, a lot of people say that stress makes them get shit done.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, what if I'm, exactly, too calm, and then I lose my spunk, I lose my edge. It's actually the opposite. You actually become more of who you are, and you become more dynamic, you become more interesting. It's actually a really interesting byproduct of meditation, and we can talk a bit more about that in depth if you like. But really embodying your own truth, and I know that sounds really woo-woo, but that is really the greatest gift of meditation.
Yeah, I mean, definitely keen to explore that more, because I did an episode a little while back on the benefit of silence and stillness and taking time to sit in quiet, because I have to say, until I took time to sit in quiet, whether it's through Vedic meditation, whether it's through just sitting and being, or sitting outdoors, or even through walking with no headphones and music on, I don't even know that I knew who I actually was, because I was just operating at this like surface level of being and doing. And I never really took time to go deep and understand. Like it sounds a bit funny, but and I think probably a lot of people operate at that level, right? And no judgment. It's kind of the way that life sets us up to be busy and distracted all the time. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I have a lot of people that say to me, Elise, I feel like I don't really know who I am. And what I say to them is, okay, have you got quiet enough in order to find out? Because when we are living our life from that very surface level of the mind, as you explained, that busyness, just go, 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 it's very difficult to know who you are. I explain it like this. If you were to imagine that when you start out, when you're born, you're perfect, whole and complete, okay? All loving, all compassionate, all things. As we go about our life, what starts to happen is we start to experience things. Social programming, societal programming, parental influence, peer influence, trauma, social media influence, and they start to influence us. So we start out as this perfect whole being who knows exactly who they are. You see a baby and they just are who they are. You know, anybody who has children will say they just came out that way. Like they're just fiery, or they're just sparkly, or they're just sensitive. Like everybody is just born the way they are born. But then as we go about life, we start to experience things. What starts to happen is we start to almost build this house around ourselves. That becomes, and that's what I call our identity. You could also use the word ego, okay? And this becomes who we think we are rather than who we actually are, okay? Because this is based on everything we have experienced since we were a child that has now shaped us. It's created this idea we have about ourselves. When we meditate, what happens is when we move beyond the active part of the mind and down into these subtler states of awareness, we start to make contact with the truest part of who we are. And again, I know that sounds a little bit woo-woo, but that is honestly the truth of it. And it's the greatest gift of meditation, because in that space, there is no storyline.
Yeah.
There's no berating. There's no, you're not smart enough, you're not cool enough, you don't know enough. There's none of that. There is just pure, loving awareness. And so when we make contact with that every day, we start to make contact with our true self. So when we hear these words bandied around, like, you just need to be more authentic, embody your authenticity. I mean, we hear it all the time, but it's like, how do I actually do that?
Yeah. What does it actually mean?
What does it even mean?
Yeah.
Totally. This is one of the entry points into being able to embody your authenticity, is finding a technique where you can actually make contact with the truest part of who you are, so that you then start navigating life from that place rather than who you think you are. So I always say with meditation, as we meditate more and more, and this takes a long time, Ange, like we don't sit down and meditate once and all of a sudden we knock the entire house down. I mean, I wish, right? I'm still chipping away at my house.
People would be putting that into a tablet if they could do that.
Right. We would be bottling that up and I would be a millionaire at this point.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not remotely feasible, but meditation does do a lot of the heavy lifting. And so what happens is, over time, we start to chip away at the house. So we start to chip out a little corner of the brick, and then we chip out another little corner, and then maybe we knock out a whole brick, and then we chip away, and then maybe a whole window knocks out. And so over time, what we're doing is we're dismantling the ego. We're dismantling the identity so that we can start to embody our truth. And I hear stories all the time from students after they learn, and once they've been meditating for a few months, and the shifts that are happening in their life because they no longer certain things no longer feel in alignment for them anymore. So they might walk away from, a group of friends who were really toxic and, judgmental or whatever. They might give up alcohol, they might, whatever it ends up being. And, that truly is the gift of meditation.
Yeah. I mean, I came and saw you and I was completely burnt out after my hectic year of, all of the stuff that had happened to me. I actually shared it on 2 podcasts ago. And a few months after that is when I resigned from my corporate career to, embark on the journey I'm on now. So certainly meditation was a part of that, and just being able to sit quietly. It's the first time in my life I've sat quietly and not just been doing. Yeah, exactly. Ironically, I think it's the people who are the doers who probably could benefit from meditation the most. But I know one of my biggest barriers to meditation was I don't have time. I'm too busy. I've got too much on. What would you say to someone who says to you, I just don't have time to meditate?
I would say then meditation is not a priority for you. Because we always make time for the things that are priorities. So we make time to scroll Instagram, we make time to check emails, we make time to watch Netflix, we make time to catch up with friends, we make time to go to the gym, whatever it is for you, listening. But we always make time for the things that are a priority in our life. And so I would say we all have time. It's just a case of where you're prioritizing your time. Yeah.
It's a really good challenge, actually. And I challenge people on anything to do with health. Open up your phone and show me your screen time each day. Because tell me where you don't have 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes to do something, because I guarantee you've looked at Instagram or TikTok or emails for a minimum of 30 minutes a day. I would say it's probably way more than that.
100%. I would also say, and this sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but I would say that meditation gives you time. And what I mean by that is when we meditate, because we're resting in this very deep healing state that is arguably deeper than sleep itself, we are healing ourselves from a lot of fatigue, okay, like laundering the nervous system of a lot of fatigue. And I always remember this. Jerry Seinfeld says meditation, for him, he's been practicing Vedic for like 20-something years. And he says, meditation is like plugging in my iPhone to charge. So we are essentially recharging ourselves so that on the other side of the meditation, we have better focus, we have more clarity, and our productivity increases. When we are really fried, our productivity starts to plummet. And I have a theory on this, and it has zero science that backs it. But I have a theory that for many people, not all, but for many people, the reason why they're punching hours late into the night or working back late into the night is not because the work necessarily requires that of them. It's because their productivity has significantly decreased in the afternoon.
Yeah.
We get really tired in the afternoon. And so we become slower. Like we just work slower. And it's normally the time that most people, it's like 2, 3 p.m. And it's normally the time that most people reach for caffeine or sugar, a stimulant, to get them through the rest of the day. That is actually your best time to meditate. And I know that's not always feasible for everybody, which is fine. We work in and around everyone's schedules. But what happens is when we do meditate in the afternoon, we launder all the stress, tension, and fatigue from the day, or not necessarily all of it, but a big chunk of it. And we clear the surface of the mind so that when we come back out, we feel a lot more refreshed. And so our productivity actually increases then for the rest of the day. So I feel like it gives you time.
Yeah, I think it's
If
so
that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it's exactly what I was saying before. When you allow yourself to respond rather than react, you inevitably save time, because when you're reacting, I know when I would react at things in corporate, I'd go round in circles and down a path, and like I wasn't looking at the situation or the problem that needed to be solved with clarity. Whereas when you take time to respond, you might take an extra 10 minutes to come up with the solution, but that solution's the right solution. So you're not actually wasting time in the busyness because you're allowing yourself to respond. So I think that makes perfect sense. And I think it'd be so interesting to do a study on that, Elise.
It would be interesting.
Because it certainly feels true of the way I would experience the way I worked in corporate particularly. I think one of the things that can help people in the corporate space understand the benefits of meditation is around what it does to your cognitive function and how, I guess it's on this same vein, how it ultimately improves creativity and decision making and ultimately leads to higher performance. Is there anything you want to touch on that sort of further down that cognitive function side of things?
Absolutely. Okay, so first of all, when we get stressed, like when we're triggered by something or we get really, really overwhelmed, our prefrontal cortex, which is basically our higher brain, okay, it's where all of our higher human functioning comes from. Our control of our attention, making good decisions, moral reasoning, all of those kinds of functions are very much part of the prefrontal cortex or governed by the prefrontal cortex. Now, when we get stressed, the prefrontal cortex shuts down. Okay, and the more primitive part of the brain comes online. When we get chronically stressed over and over and over, that prefrontal cortex, which we quite often refer to as the CEO, is chronically shutting down, and the more primitive part of the brain is chronically coming online. Okay, so when we meditate, what happens is, so in our everyday, if we were to hook ourselves up to an EEG and test the electrical activity within the brain, okay, we would see quite a bit of incohesion within the brain, okay? We would see beta or high beta brainwaves and quite a bit of incohesion. When we meditate, if we were to hook ourselves up, what we would see is a lot of cohesion within the brain. And that is because we're experiencing what we call whole brain synchronization or high brain coherence. Basically, everything good about the brain is dependent on its orderly functioning. Okay. And so when we're really stressed and we're doing, there is, of course, not a lot of cohesion within the brain. When we meditate, it's the opposite. Okay. And so that is actually strengthening the neural connections between the brain. And so what we see from that as a byproduct of that, you know, when we bounce out of meditation is we see, and particularly long term, we see better focus. Okay? We see better concentration, better cognitive abilities, spatial awareness, memory, improved long-term memory. And so that is really the science behind it. We're also, when we meditate, there's an increase of blood flow to the brain. We release serotonin and dopamine, which are these bliss chemicals. And so it feels really good. It feels really good when you're sitting to meditate, but it also, the body loves it. It is very nourishing to the body and to the mind. But really this sort of whole brain synchronization is what is happening when we meditate. And they've done lots of studies on it. And you can see when somebody starts to move into those deeper states of awareness, we start to experience alpha and theta brainwaves, and you'll see the EEG leads rising and falling in unison, and that's the cohesion. And there's lots of other sort of benefits that come. They say that long-term meditators have an increase in their telomeres. Telomeres are like the little protective caps that sit on the end of your DNA strands, and they're involved with cell replication. Your telomeres naturally shorten as you age, and stress actually accelerates that process. So meditation, I guess you could argue that it's sort of keeping you younger and fresher for longer. We also begin to use our brain in a lot more balanced way. So for most of us, we're very sort of left brain dominant. That's that like critical thinking, balancing the checkbooks, so on and so forth. But we also want to make sure that we're using the right side of the brain. And the right side of the brain is actually very integral in a work environment, because that's where your intuition and your creative problem solving comes from. And we need creative problem solving all the time within a corporate environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think everything that you shared there, Elise, is the way that you share it, it almost feels like a no-brainer. If you want to excel at work or in life, it feels like meditation is just an absolute no-brainer to implement into your life. And I think, like I said before, if that was bottled up in a pill, people would take it every day if it was giving them those benefits, right? And I think what's amazing is there's more and more studies now to back it up. I think, you sort of look back 10 or so years ago and it was seen maybe as a little bit woo-woo, but there's
a bit fringe.
But there's real science to back this up now. And you're talking about, very senior successful people who credit so much of their success with meditation as well.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting because I've taught such a cross-section of people in my career now, seeing the benefits play out across so many different sort of walks of life. I remember, if you don't mind me telling a story.
Of course.
I remember a couple of years ago, this young guy came to learn to meditate with me. And I found out that he was a young professional poker player.
Oh.
And I know, I really knew nothing about poker until I taught him, because I picked his brains a lot. He was a very successful, and still is a very successful young poker player. And he actually came to meditation because there was another poker player on the circuit who was very sort of top of the field. And he learnt Vedic meditation. And he was saying that it tremendously increased his concentration and focus at the poker table, and it was really life-changing. So this guy came to me and was like, I want to give it a go. I want to give it a try. And so anyway, I taught him to meditate, and off he went. And about 3 months later, he sent me an email and he was like, I actually just have to schedule a phone call with you because I can't even, I'm blown away by how much it has improved my life. And I have to tell you on the phone. It was really sweet. But it wasn't just, he said not only had he won the most money in a tournament since then that he's ever won in his career, he was also invited to Vegas for a worldwide poker tournament. But he also, his personal life had changed a lot without going into detail. And it was there was a lot of really beautiful things that came out of meditation, personally for him. And that is the thing with meditation, that, I always say it's not a silver bullet. I never want my students to come and learn meditation thinking that, that's all they need to do and all their problems are going to go away. It does a lot of the heavy lifting, but there's a lot of other things, as you know, in your line of work, there's a lot of other things that we need to couple with meditation in order to have really robust mental health and really robust physical health and so forth. But what it does do is it delivers magic, I always say, because I do get a little bit woo-woo from time to time.
I'm here for the woo. I love it.
I love the woo. It delivers its magic in its own little sneaky way. And so quite often people will come for, better focus, better productivity, to just be better at their job. But what they actually get out of it is far greater than that. Because ultimately, when we look at our life, we have to look at it as a whole. It's not just work and it's not just personal. It's everything.
Yeah.
And so we want to be sort of nurturing ourselves personally and professionally, and then the two combined is dynamite.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, we are one whole person, right? We are not ourselves at work and then at home. We're a whole person and everything blends in ultimately. I feel like for people who are new to meditation, or they're maybe listening to this podcast, Elise, and they don't know where to start, what would you recommend is the best way to start sort of dipping the toe in the water of meditation?
Yeah. So I always say an app is a great entry point into meditation. With an app, you'll be doing what is called mindfulness meditation. And so you'll be doing a lot of guided meditation, which can be a really lovely entry point into meditation. You can just go headfirst into something like Vedic. You don't need any meditation experience whatsoever. But if you don't have the time to invest in a 3-day course, or you don't have the money to invest in a 3-day course, then an app is a great place to start. You can also YouTube literally anything nowadays. Yeah. So you can punch into YouTube, guided meditation in the woods, guided meditation in the ocean, manifestation meditation, whatever you want. And it'll bring lots of meditation options up for you and you can be guided through. I'm also a huge proponent of breath work. I think breath work is so underrated. And I think it's incredibly powerful. And I also think it's a great tool to use on the fly.
Yeah.
So, for example, I think one of the greatest breathing techniques ever is box breathing. And it's one of the most simple breathing techniques. You don't need any training. It's breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. And it very quickly shifts you out of a really heightened state and calms your nervous system down. And you can do that anywhere. You can do that sitting at your desk. You can do that driving in your car. You can do that standing in a queue at Woolies. You can literally do it anywhere. And the more we can sort of integrate these little tools into our life, the more we're teaching our nervous system how to regulate itself, because the nervous system almost needs to be shown, because of everything that we've spoken about, that we have, we spend most of our lives in a very heightened state in our sympathetic nervous system. So we almost need to remind the body that it knows how to de-excite itself. We need to remind the nervous system that it knows what to do. And so those little gentle reminders throughout the day with some box breathing can be tremendously helpful, and that costs nothing, and it really takes no time because you can habit stack it.
Yeah. I say a lot to people, if they say they don't have time, every time you go to open a door to go into a meeting room, do 3 box breaths or 3 Stanford breaths, which is the inhale, extra sip of air and big exhale.
Yes,
every time you walk through the door, or every time you turn the car off and go to get out of the car, just do it before you get out of the car. So it's just like a little trigger. Anytime you're going through a door or opening a door, whether it's in the car or in a meeting room, do a couple of breaths. And I think that speaks to what you were saying about reminding your body and your brain that you can regulate and self-regulate and calm down.
Yeah, I love that.
I think the other thing that I love to call out when it comes to meditation is it is like going to a gym or starting running again. The first session is not going to give you all of the benefits that you've shared today, right? Like that. And I think sometimes people expect after a week to feel all of this. And I think it's, in my mind, and I'm keen for your thoughts on this, not realistic to think that. You know, it takes some time and some consistency to really see the results. In your experience, sort of how long does someone need to do it consistently to start to sort of notice the results?
Yeah. Look, honestly, it's different for everybody. Like if I were to, you know, share my husband's story, for him, he had a lot of stress symptoms when he came to meditate. He didn't feel stress, but his body was showing signs of significant stress. So he came to learn to meditate. And within 3 weeks, 80% of his symptoms were gone.
Wow.
Like it was quite remarkable.
Yeah.
That doesn't always happen though. Okay. So that for him, big shifts very quickly. For others, subtle shifts over time.
Yeah.
So I would say for most people, they'll start to experience or really sort of feel it after a few months of meditating. And that's consistently meditating every day.
Yeah.
But you will experience some subtle shifts relatively quickly. I remember teaching a woman to meditate. I was doing a private course for her, and she had quite significant PTSD, and it was affecting her sleep massively. So she was getting about 2 to 3 hours sleep a night.
Gosh, awful.
Awful. I came and taught her to meditate the very first session. I went away, I came back the next day, and she looked at me and she said, Elise, I slept 7 hours last night.
Wow.
So I always say to my students after their first session with me, I say, you might feel like nothing just happened then, but actually a lot just happened then. And so we can feel significant differences very quickly for some people. But then to feel that sort of overall change, I would say a few months.
Yeah. And where the real
and it just gets
is.
better. Yeah. And it just gets better and better. So meditation is cumulative. So it's not like you ever reach a ceiling.
Yep.
A lot of people think that. It's like, okay, I think I'm good now. You know, my anxiety is gone. I think I'm good. But meditation is still delivering its magic. And so being a long-term meditator is still incredibly beneficial.
For sure. And I think, you know, whilst people might feel good and feel like they want to stop, what doesn't stop is the overstimulation, like you were speaking about, the workload, the news, the social media, all of the information that we're getting input. So, you know, it's almost like you want to rinse your brain of that every day, right?
Absolutely. That's the perfect analogy. And I always say that to my students. It's the consistent laundering of the nervous system because we meditate and then the next day we go to work or wherever we're going and we just get hit with more. There's more stress coming in. There's more stimulus coming in. There's more overwhelm coming in. And so then we sit down and we meditate and we help to launder some of that so that we can then go to bed at night and have a better night's sleep. Because for a lot of people, they go to bed, they close their eyes and their mind switches on. And then they start ruminating from the day, everything they didn't do, their to-do list, what they need to do tomorrow, and their mind becomes very, very busy when they're actually trying to fall asleep. And there are many reasons for that. But if we can meditate in the afternoon or early evening, then we help to clear a lot of the junk in the body and the mind so that we're not then taking that into bed and starting to ruminate when we're supposed to be falling asleep.
Yeah, that's great. What's one last piece of advice that you would give to someone who has listened to this, they're interested, they're still unsure, or they're feeling stressed or on the verge of burnout? What's one last thing that you would say to someone to encourage them to get meditating?
I would say start with taking just 5 minutes for quiet, for introspection, for just being with yourself. And you could journal in that time. You could do a bit of breath work in that time. You could get your feet out on the grass or on the earth. You could go for a little walk. But something that actually grounds you and that where you're not tapped into technology and you're not tapped into any form of device, that you're just quiet with yourself in your body, I think that is truly the best place to start. And then once we start doing that a little bit more, we're teaching ourselves that we can actually sit in silence, because we're a very dopamine hungry society. So we're constantly looking for the next dopamine hit, which is why social media sucks us in, because it's more interesting to look at somebody else's life than to live our own in many instances, because there's a lot of pockets within our day that are boring, like standing in the queue at, Coles or at the post office, those in-between moments. Yeah. They're actually the moments we need to pay attention to the most, because that is what will actually create a lot of calm within your day. If you can actually honor those little moments and see them as gifts rather than another opportunity to fill the space, then you will really teach your nervous system that it's actually really safe and it's actually really beneficial to just be in stillness or in the moment.
I think that's wonderful advice. Something that I share is whenever I'm in a queue for anything, I try and ensure my phone is away. I'm not perfect at it by any means, but
I try and do the same.
Just try at the post office, at the supermarket, waiting for an appointment, try and just put that phone away. If it's a longer wait, I try and take my Kindle with me and read, so that it's something just a little bit different to scrolling on the phone. Yeah.
Beautiful.
You've had so many words of wisdom today, Elise. I think particularly around the scientific benefits and what it does for your brain and our performance, I think is just such a huge attractor to why we should meditate, but also really truly getting to know ourselves on an entirely different level. So thank you so much for your time. I've absolutely loved chatting with you, and I know the audience will too. Thanks for joining me on Work and Wellness. If today's episode resonated with you, remember, someone in your network might need to hear this too. Share it with a colleague or friend who could use these insights. I'd love to keep the conversation going, so find us on Instagram at Mind Your Grit, where we share daily tips and continue these discussions. And if you found value in today's episode, please take time to rate and review the show. It makes such a huge difference and helps other people discover conversations they might really need. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Each week, we're building a community of people who believe that success and well-being go hand in hand. You can find the notes, resources, and links from today's episode at mindyourgrit.com. This is Work and Wellness with Davies. Your work matters, your wellness matters, and this is where it all comes together. See you next week.